Okay, so let's look at this picture. Archimedes, you have scenario one. You could almost argue that you could argue, right, that this could be considered maybe a premium product where you're selling at a higher price, but you're not selling as many units. So higher margins, as opposed to this, which is at a lower price, but you're selling many more units. So this is very much about volume, and this is really about margin, right? Because you can see straight away that you have a higher gross profit margin and a higher operating profit margin. So you're going to have to do this like this because you don't do a lot of volume, right? Remember that your return on capital employed is profitability times productivity, and profitability is your margin times your asset turnover. So really, how many units you're, and if this is low, if your productivity is low, you're going to have to increase profitability to make up for it. And vice versa. If profitability is low, which is what we're seeing here, you're going to have to shift lots of items, if you like, in order to gain a higher return to make up for the fact that you're only making little bits on every unit. So what do we have here? We have um, so the question. What is the question asking? The question is saying why the GP margins are different. Well, the GP margins are different because um, well, you have higher revenue here. You know, you have higher revenue, sorry, higher sales prices here. Um, you have to, and in effect, much higher than this, much higher than this one here. Um, than the cost. The cost might not be that different when you really analyze it. You can see here they have the same fixed cost. Oh my goodness, they have the same fixed cost. So definitely, and I can even see here not so far off um, um, costs to deal with. Um, so definitely, the reasoning here of having the the gross profit margins different really is because you have higher prices here. Um, Here, scenario two has a higher volume, obviously, and so lower margins but higher volume for scenario two. I think that's the main point here with this. You're pushing out more units, double the number of units, but with at a lower price, at a lower price. Looking at materials, I can see that literally the fact that you made double this number of units, you have double the materials. I can see literally this is a straight up variable cost. So more raw materials, more output, more raw materials, exactly the same. So clear variable costs. It's not as smooth here. And I suppose here what you could do is say, well, what is the cost of labor per unit? So you have 96,000. I can do 96,000 divided by 120,000 units versus 153,600 divided by 240,000 units. So when I do 96,000 divided by 120,000 units, I get ATP. When I do the same thing, 153,000, 153,600 divided by 240,000, I get 64p. So there is, I think we saw a question earlier on where we were talking about learning curves, or there's not just learning. You understood, you were because you've been working on this project for a while, you were doing it faster, so you're spending less time on making a unit. So labor is not as variable as materials here. So we can see a fall in labor costs per unit. So we can see an economies of scale sort of thing, if you like. This must be like a rental cost, so it's a fixed cost. I don't know if they asked us that next. Yeah, and fixed costs are the way they are. They are fixed right across. So to a certain extent, the fixed cost per unit is falling, if you like, or the cost per is falling from scenario one to scenario two. So um, you're saving in that regard from one period to the next. Right. Operating profit margins, like I did in the next question, should always be discussed in relation to the operational costs. So what you should always do with these is to add up the operational costs as a percentage, the operational costs, and these are the operational costs here these are my operational costs here. So as a percentage of the revenue, that's really the best thing to do, right? I think that's important. So if you look here, you have 59,200 plus 40,000. So you have 200 here, you have 9, and you have 9 here. So 99,200 as a percentage of this turnover of 864,000 versus this thing over here, which is 97,600 plus 40,000. So you have 600, you have 7, and you have 13. So 137,000 as a percentage of turnover, as a percentage of 1152 1152000. Yes. Well, that's one point actually. In fact, let's look at this first because this is maybe one of those points where having quite a high gross profit margin has compensated for any changes in operational. So let's look at this. So 99,200 divided by 864,000. Here you have 11. So your operational costs made up about 11.5% of your revenue. And let's look here. 137,600 divided by 115,200. Sorry, 115,200 comes to 11.9. So this is about 12%. So the truth here is that, but only by 1%. It's a nice breakdown. So we can see here that operational costs, which is what we're really trying to examine as a percentage of revenue, um, when we compare both, it literally is it's 11.5% here and it's 12% here. So very close. So very close. So really, in terms of operational costs between the two, there is very little difference. The change here is still carrying over from the gross profit change. The gross profit margin is feeding into the operational profit margin that you're seeing over here. I mean, if you look at this difference here, that's roughly about 7.8%, the difference into, which is almost 8%. If you look at the same thing, it's still 8%. So the actual operational cost as percentages of revenue have not changed, right? Have not changed. And I think that's important to deal with. And finally, the last bit here wants a recommendation of what actions to take, which is an interesting question, really, because you see, ultimately, we only want to be making products that have higher gross profit margins and higher operating profit margins. I mean, what we want to do ultimately is to make scenario one. Oops, sorry. We want to major on in scenario one where we can sell for £7.20 and keep those margins high and push the volume. So, like I said, it's almost like how do you sell a luxury product and if you like sell as much as possible because you see the problem is you still have to cover your fixed costs, you see, and volume is important as much as you want to and so really the key point here is this is your advantage right now, but for how long is the point? This might be quite a stable product. So from the numbers, pure numbers, I would argue that you want to stick with scenario one just because you have higher numbers. And for you're basically saying for every £100 I'm making, I'm keeping this. Compared to this, why would you want to keep these? That's relevant. Your material cost as a percentage is less. You could work here to improve your economies of scale and to train your staff. And like I say, of course, this is going to be £2.40. So either we find a way of negating that fixed cost and changing spaces to deal with that. Let's look at some of their answers very quickly. They talk about sales prices being higher in the scenario one, which leads to an increase in GP margin, but sales volumes are half. Materials are constant, exactly, so not affecting it. Labor costs is 0.8, like we did, 0.64. Economies of scale, learning effect. Good points to highlight. Yes, economies of scale, learning effect. Fixed costs are constant, so we just need to cover them. All right, so they've kind of majored in. The operating profit margins are different due in part to a reduction in the gross profit in scenario two. Yes, and in part to increased sales, and which is what we said. We sort of argued that you'd gone from 11% here to 12% here in terms of your operations, which I think is the key point. I mean, that's the kind of you do actually, to be honest, actually it is very stark. That's the problem there, isn't it? But you see, it's not the issue. You should always look at this in the context of turnover, which is what we did. So it's easy to say this has gone up by here, but if it's all about what we expect selling and distribution to increase if you're selling more units. So it's about the percentage changes as opposed to the naked numbers as they are. So recommendation scenario one feels the best, largest profit ratios. Um, there's volume. Um, yeah. So the question here is how do we gain market share? Is the point. All right. Great stuff.